Well, guys, welcome. It's another episode of 20 Schemes UNCUT podcast. We are here again in the west of Scotland. We've got Terry McCutcheon, the legend that is. Again, like we did My Hope Story podcast with Terry, last year during one of the lockdowns?
Aye, last year.
And it was only like 5.5 hours long, eh? It was great.
Yeah, helpful for insomnia.
Exactly. We're going to link to that though, so it's great. That was talking through how the Lord saved Terry, which is great. He's told me though to not let him talk as much. But that's not the point. People don't want to hear me. I've got the wisdom to offer. So, Terry, we're going to think a little bit about addiction in the west of Scotland. So you are setting up a charity, Hope for Glasgow, that kind of works with that specifically. But first, you want to give us the kind of not 5-hour version of your story, like so what was growing up in the west of Scotland like, and how did you come to know the Lord out of that?
Aye, I'm for the housing scheme no far from Ballarnock, Black Hill. And grew up with five brothers and in the 70s, and pretty normal kind of a growing up really. I seen Paul McLaughlin's podcast yesterday.
Is he like the one guy in life that you're taller than?
Probably, aye. I don't like your altitude, but where Paul's, listening to Paul's Roman Catholic faith was right at the centre of the family's life. There, they were real Catholics, real practice, devout Catholics, and try to set their lives by that. We were very nominal. We went along for the things, but it never really played, a part kind of in our lives. And there may be a few families in the housing scheme like Paul's, but for most, we were all very kind of a nominal, and it was tribalism. Very opposite of Paul. What Paul said, what he thought about Protestants, that was us. Only Catholics, you went to a certain school, you supported a football team, and you had a certain view of politics. But around about 15 or so, got involved in drugs, and that took my life for all different types, for 15 to 27, homeless, all sorts of stuff.
Well, you had a great line that I've talked about with guys, even since that podcast, something along the lines of, drugs weren't the problem, like drugs were your attempt at the solution. Was that what you say?
Yeah, drugs were the attempt at the solution. So they weren't the problem. I would always say that Proverbs chapter 9 talks about the two voices, the voice of wisdom and the voice of folly, and both voices offer the same stuff. They offer food and drink, which are two essential needs, right? But the voice of folly encourages us to meet those needs in a sinful way. And so, we've all got issues. We've all got issues, and it's how we meet those issues. So for myself, seeking comfort, seeking refuge, seeking pleasure, seeking joy, and drugs. And so, one of the things that I would say about addiction is it's idolatry. And so, it was an attempt at a solution, trying to fix something that was wrong in me, but doing it in a kind of a sinful, ungodly way. So that was my life till about 27. I'd met Christians previously in the red light district where our hostel was, and they ran soup kitchens, which always impressed me, because it was that area of the city centre where a lot of tough men wouldn't go under the cover of darkness. A lot of mentalness happening, and there was these Christians every night of the week, right in the middle of the madness. And that really impressed us. But it was a number of years later when I first met the Christians that I got saved myself. I had a house, had a girlfriend, jobs and all that. But like the Rolling Stones, I couldn't find any satisfaction, though I tried and I tried and I tried. And the Christians that I'd met years previously were the same ones that helped me to achieve abstinence and show me a different way to live. Roughly when I was 27, 2 days after. 2 days before 9/11,
wow.
I was converted. So 2001, 9th of September 2001, I was converted. My first day clean was the 3rd of September 2001. I spent a few years working there, and then I went and trained at Cornhill under Willie Phillip at the Tron, and that's my church. And I spent the next 9 years there working and training.
And that's where we met, wasn't it? So I was working,
Hi.
youth worker, Ballarnock Greyfriars, you were Tron and speaking at a kind of, I guess, East of Scotland, East End of Glasgow event.
It was a youth weekend away, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And it was great. It was so encouraging. And I'd always, any time I get the opportunity to do anything like that for anything up that end of the city or any of the schemes, I'm right there. Because like the Apostle Paul, he's got a real heart for the Israelites and your own people, and so which is why, you know, doing this today, I love what you guys do. And so sorry.
Okay, so you were working for the Tron,
Yeah.
weren't you? So you kind of saved through Cornhill, and then you worked there for a number of years doing, I guess that's where this kind of stuff started.
Yeah, the genesis of Hope for Glasgow began at the Tron. And for 5 years, I was working as the Associate Minister for Pastoral and Social Care. So I'd done a bit of preaching. I would, if anybody needed a visit for the minister, I would be the guy. I would, you know.
Did they like be like, no, I want the minister? What you did here, Terry?
No, that wee guy.
Or did you wear a wee collar when you were going, just so they knew?
None of that malarkey. And I never had chinos on either. So, you know, we would. So I'd done that a couple of days a week myself, and pastoral visiting, which meant you would take the funerals and that too, which is great privilege, you know. But a couple of days a week I was doing this stuff. So the genesis of Hope for Glasgow began during that period, working at the Tron. But, you know, as we'll get into what, you know, I found that I was being pulled about a lot, do you know what I mean? And one of the things that drug addicts, people that are trying to move away from that sort of a life, is they need your time, they need structure, and it isn't really something that you can really do part-time. You can't really support people part-time, and that's one commodity that folks coming for that type of life need from you. But you know yourself, when you're working for a church, time's at a premium. And so that was grinding on me for a couple of years, because my heart is for those still stuck where the Lord saved me fae. And so was praying and, you know, talking to my wife, talking to my best pal. They didn't think I was off my head or anything, so they were encouraging me to keep thinking these things through, keep praying these things through. And then it was 2016 that, you know, I decided, right, spoke to the leadership at the church about taking a sidestep in ministry and to set up Hope for Glasgow in its own right. And so that's what we did.
Awesome. So we'll talk about that in a minute. I'm going to actually mute my phone because I just heard I got a message there. Probably shouldn't have. That's very unprofessional, guys. Sorry. Let's talk about that in a minute. First off, so west of Scotland, I guess notoriously would have had quite a big reputation for being a place of substance abuse. Addiction would be prevalent in some of the scheme communities and other places. Is that fair? Would that be your experience? Like, how have you seen addiction play out here in Glasgow in the West?
Massively. I mean, it's shifted at times, right? Because remember in the 80s when, you know, Edinburgh was, you know, the AIDS capital, the HIV capital of Europe. So, you know, it swung at times. But, you know, West of Scotland mentality, hard working, hard drinking, all that stuff. And, you know, being brought up in a housing scheme, it's the norm. Me and my wife were just talking about that the other night. Things that happen, you accept as normal, but they're no normal. You know, and we would have seen a lot of that. Families devastated with addiction. Certainly alcohol all the way through, which is an acceptable one. But then through the years, heroin and all the other stuff that, you know, we're seeing, street Valium and all that nowadays as well. And you know, in the past few years, you know, we've been top of the league for things that you don't want to be top of the league for. And the drug death crisis kind of here, you know, where the past eight years or so, our drug deaths figures have broke records all the time, and that's not including alcohol. We're just talking about drug deaths, and it was just a couple of years ago that drug deaths overtook alcohol for the first time. This is Scotland, and you know, certainly it's still a huge issue here. So much so that we're usually changing every year. 1 year it's Dundee who have got the highest drug deaths statistically by head of population, and then it's kind of a Glasgow, and I think we're sitting somewhere currently at 24, I think. Don't quote me on that, it's just off the top of my head. I think somewhere like 24 drug deaths per capita per 100,000. But Glasgow and Dundee are up at 44.4, you know. So that's a, I think that's a fair. It's no means city and all that. It's fair. It's a fair.
And I guess like as well, I've seen some of that. You'll have seen a lot of that. It's not just stats; it's people, and the kind of devastation, or I guess the devastation one that gets people to that place of addiction and thinking there's no way out. But then the devastation for those around about them as well, and the effect on families in our communities or just throughout the west of Scotland. Like it's not just a stat, isn't it? It's brutal.
It's people. It's people's lives. It's communities. It's sons, fathers, brothers, uncles, all that stuff. They're not just numbers. They're people made in God's image, right? And God's made them and stamped His seal all over them, and they were made for so much more, and so. Alcoholics Anonymous, they have a separate fellowship called Al-Anon, and that would be for the families of those who have, so that if you're a husband or a wife of somebody who's an alcoholic, you can go there for support to help you. And they would, that fellowship should be somewhere between 6 to 10 times bigger than Alcoholics Anonymous, because that's what they reckon. On average, there's 6 to 10 people directly affected by your addiction. Alcoholics Anonymous would say this. I don't agree that addiction's a disease, and we'll get into that, but Alcoholics Anonymous say, it's a good wee line, the alcoholic carries the disease, but the family carry the spots. So they're all totally affected by it, directly and indirectly. You begin to, the person in addiction will tell lies. That becomes their native language. They deny, they minimise, they justify their drinking, but it's all lies, and all covering up. And what ends up happening is family members then take on that mantle. Yeah. They tell lies. Oh no, he's not feeling that great today. No, he's unwell, and they begin to lie, and so they're affected and they're damaged by that.
Even the whole without wanted to, there's a lot of enabling of addiction because it's just that torn. Like it's my boy or it's my girl.
Yeah.
And
because folks are trapped. They don't really know. They don't really know what to do, right? They're torn between, want to help but want to set about them, and they don't. They just don't know what to do.
So. Helpful, therefore, let's think of us as Christians. So again, I think if you ask any Christian, should we be helping here, should we be engaging here, would say, yeah, okay, but I think there's a kind of a fear or reluctance because maybe we don't know how to get involved, what best to do. And also I think, and again, you might say this is unfair, and if it is, tell me, I kind of feel like the more conservative of us, so we're more gospel-centred, we want to always be sharing the hope of Christ and preaching the gospel, forgiveness of sins and reconciliation, all that. Almost shy away from the kind of working in that kind of addiction recovery community more. And so you'll have people with not as strong gospel convictions who are Christians, and then guys, maybe who you met, I don't know where they're coming from, but would do a lot of stuff. But what I love is that you're coming from the same theological convictions for people who are going to listen to us, or people who are going to, take the word, take the gospel seriously. And yet that propels you, and I think should propel us into those, areas of life, because it is the gospel that ultimately brings hope. I'm talking a lot of mince here, but is that fair?
I think that's absolutely fair. If we could talk about churches in a spectrum, and maybe over here you've got our charismatic brothers and sisters, and then over here we've got us who pride ourselves in having the right doctrine and teaching the Bible the right way, and really, teaching, doing expository preaching. I think that would be fair, and I would probably say that the more conservative we get, the less that we see, less social action. And so maybe our charismatic brothers and sisters, they're maybe more involved in outreach ministries and stuff like that brings them into the sphere of folks with these issues, and therefore they have a heart, and it's maybe easier then to invite folks to your church. But the more along this kind of a conservative line you go, I'm at the Tron. I don't know everybody at the Tron, but I'm in a church of 500, and as I say, I don't know everybody's background, I don't know everybody's situation, but I would reckon there's maybe, about 10 of us as members, maybe, that I know, who have had this issue or have struggled with this sin. But if I went to a charismatic church, maybe half the size, I'm sure we'd be surprised. They would maybe be 30 or 40 people kind of like me. And it's always been a struggle for me, because I know that the real way. I've got friends in America, and they've got a rehab called Redemption House, and this is their strapline: worshipping our way out of addiction. It's brilliant, worshipping our way out of addiction, because really, when you look at the drug addict, that's what they are. They are a worshipper, but they are a false worshipper. They are worshipping idols, and they're enslaved by them. Their whole life is dictated to by them. But that's why folks coming out of that lifestyle, they need to be in churches. Now, great, they're in our charismatic brothers and sisters' churches. But when we go and we learn the scriptures, we learn to worship God in every area of our lives. And worshipping God is the best defence against all the idolatries of our heart. And so I think it's imperative. It's imperative that folks coming out of that life are rooted in the local church. And Hope for Glasgow are all about that.
Which is why, and again, I think the idolatry imagery is key, isn't it? Because it, again, and I think we said this even when we did Zach's podcast, it kind of like flattens that ground, because we've all then got the same issue.
We're the same.
Like, we're all idol worshippers. And again, a lot of the time it can be, and again, particularly in the UK, the conservative, maybe more reformed expository preaching church has been the more middle class, affluent church in a broad stereotype. And so it could be easy to look for people from an addiction recovery background and think, they're so unlike me, I don't know what to do. Whereas the idolatry says, no, we all look for hope and joy in things that are the Lord gives and not the Lord, or in things that are made and not the one who makes stuff. And it does kind of flatten that ground and help us see, well, the answer to both of these things, therefore, is worship Christ, and therefore preach the gospel, isn't it?
Definitely, because, in Adam, we're all idolaters, and we're all slaves to sin. John 8 says, anybody that makes a practice of sin and becomes a slave to sin. And so if we see ourselves, and to see addiction in these categories as well, rather than some of the secular models that would teach, you've got an illness, you've got a sickness, you've got a disease for which you are not responsible. That's the caveat, for which you are not responsible. If I'm not responsible, who is? Which is why, our meetings, we say that, our wee meetings are called Road to Recovery, right? And we would say, you get on the road to recovery just exactly the same way as you get on the road to addiction, by making a choice, right? So you're involved. You make a choice to pick up, but where that choice takes you, I would say my addiction began with a choice that became a dominant choice, and yes, in the end I was enslaved, and it seemed like I didn't have a choice, but we've always got a choice.
Is it like Ed Wells calls it voluntary slavery?
Voluntary slavery, which is bang on, right? And you need to understand both of them. Voluntary, which means you can fight, but your fighting's not enough. Slavery, because you're enslaved and you need help from outside of yourself, which is where other people can help, but ultimately the help comes from the things of the Lord.
So talk us through then how you came from out of addiction, through Cornhill, working at the Tron. How were you starting to engage with people from your background? Like, what did that look like, and how did that morph into what you're doing today, Hope for Glasgow?
Yeah, Mez did a thing. It was a wee blog thing that he wrote. It was a 2-parter thing, and it was really looking at Mercy Ministries. And he wasn't slating Mercy Ministries, but he was saying there's a lot of resources pouring into Mercy Ministries, and how valuable that is. And I can't remember if I stole this for him or I read it somewhere else, but it's certainly not mine. But I might have stole it. I might have stole it for him. But there are many ministries in our churches that are Dead Sea ministries. And what's meant by that is, one of the reasons the water in the Dead Sea is dead is because it doesn't go anywhere. And there are many ministries in our churches that are Dead Sea ministries. They don't go anywhere. We say, well, let's start a wee lunch club or something. There's poor people in our area, and it makes us feel good about ourselves. You make us an apple crumble, and I'll make a pot of mince and totties and whatever else. But there's never any thought given to
where are they going?
How are we going to move these folks on? And it's Peter Bolt. Peter Bolt's got a book called Mission Minded. It's a great book, which deals with all that, looking at all different areas of engagement with folks, and then how are we moving folks along? Because ultimately where we want folks is we want them in Christ in the church, in the worshipping congregation of God. And so I knew there was a few bridges. You know, the Tron is a conservative evangelical church, and if the people in the Tron or conservative churches would go, oh, I don't really know how to deal with these folks, well, the same's true for the other side. You know, for the folks coming through their life with addiction would feel uncomfortable. They go, I've got nothing in common with these characters. They're all doctors and they've all been to university and all that stuff, and they've all got double barrel names and chinos.
Did you give chinos out the door? Is that what you're going to come on to here? That was the one bridge you were going for?
I'm getting that in because you always kind of get it in. But that was one of the best things about leaving. I didn't need to wear trousers and all that anymore. I could wear what
You still do wear trousers though, right? We'll say that.
Aye.
It's not the same.
Aye, thankfully. So the Tron were great. Wally was great at just saying, right, who have I got? Let him go on with it. You know, recognising his gifts, what mine were, let me go on with it. And so, you know, I started a couple of groups a week. I started a service called Tron at 2. And that was meant to be like a bridge service, right? So we Tron at 2 because it happened in the Tron at 2, right? Right, genius, right? And so that, you know, that was meant to be like a bridge service so that folks could come into the church, feel comfortable in the church, engage with the church, i.e. the people, because there are tons of people with a great heart, and you'll find that in our churches. There are people with great hearts that want to do things but maybe don't know, or there's no a system or something to help them to get their teeth into things like that. So we set up, you know, Tron at 2, and it was on twice a month. So these things were helpful for that way, getting folks in, beginning to deal with folks. And I volunteered. The Tron seconded me one day a week to Glasgow City Mission.
Okay.
And so that brought me into the sphere of mere folks as well. And so it was then easier to invite folks. So if you're going to fish, you can fish in a puddle if you want, but you need to go where the fish are. And so sometimes you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Sometimes you can become a volunteer at some of these places, you know, having an end goal in mind, that it's not an end in itself. You're trying to think about moving people on, so maybe becoming a volunteer at some of these places where you can build relationships with folks and invite folks into things. And so that's, you know, that's what we did. And but as I say, that stuff was then grown on me, saying you need to be doing this more. Folks need input, they need support. If you've got a couple of things like that, they are a great start, right? Because then things can lead to other things. Meeting with folks for one-to-one for a cup of tea, maybe doing Christianity Explored or whatever else, some other kind of introductory thing. Because that's where we want to get folks to, right? We want to get them, you know, to the real food that satisfies. So we would use food as a hook, but it was to an end in itself, you know, where, you know, we were teaching the Bible. And
we always think about it in our church, like, about feeding, right? Because we love our food here. And so the kind of steps as we think about going to our mission is find. So wherever there's people, let's go to those people. And so what we say is we might put on things as a church to try and find them, but it's far easier, exactly what you were saying, to go to where people already are at and just to plug in there. It's less labour intensive, but it's also easier to find people. So go wherever it takes to find people. Engage with the people that are there. So get to know them. What is their, you know, what are they going through in life? What's their joys? What's their fears? What do they think of the gospel? What's their understanding of church? And then you evangelize. If we're not talking about Jesus, there's no point. We need to get talking about Jesus. But and we use that as we're thinking about any people group. Who are we trying to engage with here? And I think that's what you're saying, isn't it? Well, if there's a recovery community, there's people struggling with drug addiction, let's do that. Where can we find them? Like, where do we need to go, or what can we do in order to find these guys? And then how can the existing church engage with them? How can we get alongside them to preach Christ? And I think for many churches that can seem like a scary thing, but actually it's just the normal way we do ministry. For any other, like with kids clubs, we do it the same, right? Or where do we find kids? Well, we put on a club if there's not one there, and then we get to the Lube and share Christ. Where do we do men's groups? Well, we put on football things, and we get. So I guess what you're saying is that same thing. Whatever it takes to find guys in these kind of communities, find them, get to know them, share Christ.
And folks are people. Yeah. Do you know? And I read a quote there recently for, I think it was some American psychiatrist who was top psychiatrist, and he said, you know, we're facing an impossible task. with the amount of people. He says, sure, we can do some things. We can give folks medication that can alleviate symptoms, but he says in a lot of cases it creates symptoms. He says, no, it's a rigged game, it's a loaded game against us. And then he said, ultimately what people need is meaning and relationship. And is that no the church, right? Meaning and relationship. The thing that me and you need is just what all these maybe, broken people, the combination of their choices and, life opportunities has brought about. But they need meaning and they need relationship. They're just people underneath all that stuff and engaging. What was the D, by the way?
Disciple. So we don't want to just get them in the door, we want to share our lives with them and kind of grow them as disciples.
Aye, brilliant.
So let's think a little bit about maybe some barriers to that, and then we can then finish by sharing a little bit of hope for Glasgow and kind of how you're encouraging the church to do that and some of the ways you're also supporting the church alongside it. But in terms of barriers then, do you think, so in terms of the Tron, having that Tron at 2 as a kind of bridge into the service, what do we as conservative gospel preaching churches, is there any other ways we need to maybe change how we think or just be wary of how so people from an addiction background maybe, you know what I'm saying here, like might come in?
Aye.
Is there a thing maybe we don't need to change, maybe it's fine, or I don't know?
No, I like the feed thing. I mean, if we've got our mind, I'm stealing that, right? I've got Dead Sea, I've got feed. Exactly. But I think if we're doing these things naturally, loving folks, being interested in folks, willing to take a chance. Obviously, I mean, I would, you're going to have to take chances, and sometimes you're going to take losses, right? And inviting folks in, helping folks to see. Because sometimes folks haven't seen normality, haven't sat down for a Sunday lunch, run a table and whatever, and helping folks to experience all that stuff is tremendous. It's really good. So I would think trying to have things like that.
We're going.
It's good.
No, I think what you're saying is totally true in terms of it's seeing people as people, and so like if there's someone from a middle class background that will come in, you'll have them along, you'll eat with them, you'll get them involved in your life, right? If there's someone from any kind of background that's different for you, what do? We do the same thing. We get them along, we get them in our life. We don't just see them. So what we'd often say to folk, which I know again is your heart, it's not just about coming to church on a Sunday morning. Yeah. And if we think the answer to everyone's problems is leave all the drugs, leave all that community behind, come on a Sunday morning at 11, come in a midweek Bible study at 6:30, that's going to do nothing at the end of the day. Now, we pray they're going to hear the gospel and get saved. But they need life, they need that relationship bit as well, don't they? So we need the church to be the church.
Yeah, and that's why I love what you do, because you're only driving in into Ballannock and saying, hey, live out the life of Jesus, the life of discipleship this week, we'll see you next Sunday. Yous are in there with them, showing them how to live as Christians amidst all this stuff. And I mean, I think what we're talking about a wee bit is like, did you know preach through James recently?
Still are.
Right, so James tackles a lot of that, doesn't he? There's maybe the more successful people who are like us that we go towards, and then there's others. And I think also too, there's some heart issues in there. You had Zach Watt, tremendous guy, great help to us here at Hope for Glasgow, but there's heart issues there as well of maybe what are the barriers. Maybe we're afraid, and what we're afraid of man. We've got there's fear there. We don't see God in it, and we think, don't really know too much, but I'll just leave that alone. And so there's fear, and I think we've Wally's just preached through Ecclesiastes, and right at the end of in chapter 11 it talks about go for it. Go have a
throw your bread in the water.
I go for it, exactly. Go for it, man. And so we take chances in it and learn to lose with God if we lose. But remember, we're talking about people made in His image, and so it's worth having a shot, isn't it?
Yeah, that's where it might seem riskier, but was it Piper's whole thing? Risk is right. Like we were all risky to God. Like all of us have got the potential to fall back into our sin at any moment in time. I'm sure there's additional pressures that bring on that, but that's the gospel, right? That God takes like pieces of jars of clay and shines the light. And I love that. So let's think again. Hope for Glasgow. So you moved out of the Tron as the kind of assistant associate minister, and you're now doing Hope for Glasgow, kind of full-time charity. how did that come about, and what are you doing as a charity, Hope for Glasgow?
So as I said, the genesis of that was in the work. So it grew out of the work that I started at the Tron, and I would have said, you know, I never moved on for the Tron. I moved out, you know, and I think they were happy for me to get out, like a teenager, get out.
And you're still there on the eldership?
Yeah, I'm still there. Aye, great church, love it. And so we set up as, I think, a company at first and charity and whatever. But actually, the day that we became a legal entity was the 9th of September 2016, which was 15 years to the day if I had been converted. You know, so I just felt that God was saying to us, don't worry. I was here at the beginning of your spiritual life, and I'm here at the beginning of the life of Hope for Glasgow. So we've been going 5 years, and what we're trying to do, Pete, is we're trying to be a parachurch organisation in the truest sense of the word. So I'm sure a lot of folks listening would know about Teen Challenge and like places like the Haven and stuff, and that's residential rehab. So that's where people actually move out of the community and they go stay somewhere somewhere far away where they can concentrate on kind of getting clean and sober. But we're what's called we're community rehab. So if folks come to us during the day while they're still in the community, they come to us during the day for group work, input, support, one-to-ones, and then go back home at night. And I think there's, you know, I don't think it's an either or, but we were just talking over lunch. Our friend Stewart Patterson for Easterhouse Community Church wrote a wee blog thing the other day, and he was talking about firsts. Stewart himself went away to a Teen Challenge rehab over 20 years ago and get clean and become a Christian. And one of the firsts that he was talking about was coming back to Easterhouse, the place where all the stuff happened. And so in many ways, when you go away to residential rehab, as Jesus says, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. In many ways, that's done for you, but you haven't actually done it, you know. And there's a lot in being able to turn and step away from things and make decisions right there in the flesh to say, no mate, I'm not doing that anymore. No mate, I'm doing this. And so that's what we're engaged in the community. So folks come to us during the day, they get input, support. You know, we promote total abstinence. You know, we don't see alcohol and drugs as separate. We deal with them both as the same. So we promote abstinence. If somebody wants to do something further down the road and make decisions, that would be fine for them. But you know, we kind of say, you know, as an old guy once said to me, it was about maybe becoming a social drinker. I heard a guy say, you know, I was always a social drinker. The social gave me the money and I drank it. But this old guy had said to me, to warn me against the thought of ever social drinking, he said, when Daniel got out of the lion's den, he didn't go back for his bunnet, you know. So that's always kind of a stood ways. And we have evening support meetings as well. So before lockdown, we had 4 meetings. We value the local church, so we're trying to take the fight right into the heart of our communities. There's a great battle going on in our communities. In 2020, in the under 65s, 651 people in Scotland died with or of COVID. Same period, same demographic, 1,339. So you could say that you're twice as likely in Scotland in 2020 dying for a drug overdose than you were COVID, and that's no counting alcohol, by the way. And so our schemes are riddled. And so we were trying to do, through the vehicle of the local church, we set up support groups there so that the church would become known as a church that cares and caters. And we were wanting to do that through the vehicle of the local church, because what we were then wanting to say is, come to this church. Come to this church.
What's your line, like, you do what you do, so the church, someone like the church should do what only it can do, or something? I've heard you say that before.
Oh, you've got me.
It must be one of your list of Terry's sayings. You know, come on,
I don't know, but you know, this is what I would say. Hope for Glasgow see the local church as central to addressing the addiction issues in our city. No Hope for Glasgow. We play a small part. because remember what I said earlier, what I believe, I think the Bible teaches that the root of addiction is, is choice, sin, false worship, idolatry, adultery, rebellion, foolishness. It's being taught the Bible that helps us to deal with all the idolatries of our hearts, helping us to worship God in every area of our lives, being reminded of the Christ who died for us, meeting with fellow idolaters who themselves are learning to leave the life of idolatry behind them. So folks absolutely need that. So we could be an incubator. We can maybe help get people going, but we want people rooted, in the local church. They need the local church, but the local church needs them as well, right? So that's what we're going at. I think before lockdown, we had four support groups in various locations throughout the city, but through different things, staff moving on and different things. Currently, we've just got 2 meetings. So we've got one in the Tron on a Monday night, and that's a in person and online. So during COVID, we picked up a lot of people from London, Florida, New Zealand, Edinburgh, Musselburgh, all sorts of places. And so now as things are beginning to open up, we felt that we couldn't just dump folks. We had to keep our online presence as well. So we meet on a Monday night for those in and around Glasgow to come in person. But for those out with Glasgow, there's an online element that they can join. And then on a Thursday night, we just have a kind of an online meeting. We initially were only for men, but just before lockdown, we did open one of our meetings to women, and then throughout lockdown, all of our meetings were open to women. And currently, the Monday night meeting is open for women, and obviously the Thursday night one as well. And folks need that. We've got a lot of people, Pete, who come to our meetings who actually became addicted after they were converted.
Because people wouldn't think.
People are shocked by that. People think that most people's stories follow my pattern. Drug addict, became a Christian, met Jesus, and away you go. But remember, being a drunkard or a drug addict or whatever, it's a sin just like any other. And we can all fall into stuff, and there are many folks in our churches who've fallen into these things. They've begun to take refuge in substances rather than in the things of Jesus. And so we've had folks who initially found recovery run about Alcoholics Anonymous and felt quite ashamed, quite alone, quite isolated in church. Felt like they were the worst Christians in the world. I can't possibly be a Christian. I've become an alcoholic while I was a Christian. And then finding their way to us. So that's why I love the BC UK stuff, because
Biblical Counselling UK, that's where Zach
it's fantastic stuff, because in many ways, see a lot of these social things, these addiction things, the church has given up ground to the world. And there's no book like the Bible that speaks deeper, clearer and fuller about addiction than the Bible. I mean, I've got my wee pal Robert, he was going to a Bible study one night, and this other drug addict lassie said to him, "The Bible? What's the Bible got to do with addiction?" And wee Robert says, "Well, apart from every page, nothing." Because it's there on every page, but it's how we get that out and help. And we've took a backward seat in that stuff, and we've allowed other folks to have a free reign in that area, and because then we've not done it for so long, we forget. But that's why I love BC UK, because BC UK helps the ordinary person to be able to utilise gifts and learn things about how to help and apply God's word, just even in a pastoral sense. So that stuff's gold.
Okay, and again, we've really appreciated you have been sending us guys as well, that it's not just someone you say. We have in fact, there's a guy going through our membership process just now, going to become a member of our church, who came through you saying, "Here's a church to go to," and he's saying, which has been great. And again, I love that model of being able to provide kind of additional support that particularly many smaller local churches just wouldn't have the manpower or ability to do a lot of the intensive walking day by day kind of stuff, but can preach the word and have Christian community. And so I love how you're truly a parachurch in the sense that you're saying you're trying to support the ministry of the local church doing what you could do enabling, therefore, and freeing up the local church to do what only they can do, which is preach the word, pastor the flock, and do that in community together. So, really thankful for you, Terry. Any things about the future that we could be praying for, or that are on your horizon to share?
Yeah, I would think we're kind of in a period of review, just reviewing the shape of things and staff and things. So I would value prayer for us as we think that through. The way we have went at our partnerships with churches has been previously that we would facilitate that, but what we're thinking about now is maybe helping to mobilise the church. What resources do you actually have yourselves? Because, like, for talking, here's an example. I was taking a support group in a church that I don't go to, and if somebody came along and I'm saying, come here on Sunday, well, the first barrier for that person coming is coming through the door, and so sometimes some people, not all people, they need their hand held just to go through, because it's an alien environment. And so if you get somebody coming and they say, I say, come here on Sunday, and they go, will you meet me outside? I go, I don't come here. So what we're trying to do is to help the church, rather than us going in and doing it for the church, is thinking, what resources do you have, and what can we help you with to help you getting going, because there's more longevity in that, and then it's more ownership. You've mobilised the church, and you know, people don't need to have come from that type of background. You only need to have ever received comfort for the Lord Jesus for your own battles to be able to help folks, right? And that, you know, that's why we all go through hardships and difficulties and troubles, so that we can help others in trouble. So we're thinking that stuff through about how we can better serve the church, not going in and doing everything for the church, but helping the church to mobilise itself and serve folks like this in their own community. So as we think these things through, I'd appreciate prayer for these things.
Sweet. Well, thanks, Terry. We'll put down the link for Hope for Glasgow as well underneath. Remember to check out the really long 2-hour podcast, which I think is great, by the way. I don't know why folk aren't watching it. But,
if you want a kip, you want a kip.
And again, we always say, or certainly I always say, don't at the end of these, like, the point of this is so that people can see the need. The people that the west of Scotland has got plenty of need for people to come in and share the gospel, because that is the only hope we have in life and death, right? And so if there's things here that you're hearing, or maybe if the Lord is calling you, do you know what? Maybe that's not as weird as I thought. Maybe it's not as hard as I thought. Maybe if I love Jesus and love people, I can come and get involved with this. Get in touch, because the need's massive. The labourers are few. And so we're praying the Lord will send more. But anyway, thanks, Terry.
Bang on, thanks, mate.
Cheers, guys.